Let's continue our online series by talking about a tradition named Sikhism. And you can see in the subtitle there the union of Hinduism and Islam. So we'll be talking about Western traditions later on in this course, including the Islamic faith. But it will be a part of this discussion because it's a part of Sikhism, which has elements of Hinduism, an Eastern tradition, so-called, that we've talked about. And one thing that I like very much about teaching Sikhism is it's a religion of peace that came out of a time and of a region where there wasn't always peace. So there's an area of northern India and parts of Pakistan known as the Punjab. You can see the area there on the map. So we're going to fast forward many centuries after Hinduism and Buddhism and Jainism, and we're in the 16th century of the Common Era. And we're in this area known as the Punjab. Now, there were many Hindus living in this area, and there were many Muslims living in this area. And as I mentioned, sometimes there was conflict among them. Part of this is because Islam was starting to expand in the area. And in the 10th century, this expansion for some was an invasion, particularly of northwest India. Now there are two Sikhs who are probably some of the most integral, most important to the tradition, and one of them is known as Kabir. And you can see his life and death dates there. He's known as the Uniter, and he was born Muslim, but he was very much influenced by Hindus. Kabir is one of these influential people, and the other is a man named Nanak. So we've got Nanak and Kabir. And there are some paintings of both of them. So I said Kabir was born Muslim, but was very much influenced by some of his Hindu neighbors. Nanak was the opposite, was born Hindu, but was very much influenced by the Islamic faith because at school, the headmaster, the schoolmaster, was a practicing Muslim. So according to this faith, God says to Nanak, Nanak, you are a prophet of the true religion. There is no Muslim, there is no Hindu. So the idea here being that there's something incomplete about Islam, something missing from Hinduism, and that the union of the two is this beautiful blend that should be pursued. The followers of Nanak were called Sikhs, which is a Punjabi word for disciples. Now, one of my favorite stories of Nanak is about his death and the time right before it. So Nanak and Kabir are the two people who kind of began this religion. And they started to gather followers, many of whom grew up as Hindu, and many of whom who grew up as Muslim. So there was a debate about what should happen to Nanak when he passes away. So this is obviously toward the end of Nanak's life. He was ill, and he knew, and the people around him knew, that death was near. Now there was a debate about what to do with the body, with Nanak's body after he passes, because of the discrepancy between these two traditions, Islam and Hinduism. Hinduism embraces samsara, reincarnation, and thus is tradition to cremate the dead. However, in Islam, it's much more traditional to bury the dead. Well, you can't cremate and bury. I mean, I guess theoretically you could bury ashes, but that's just not the same. And so Nanak, being this peacemaker among two traditions and communities that had sometimes fought each other, came up with the solution. He told his disciples, he said, those of you who opt for cremation, I want you to go to the market and buy the freshest flowers. And same thing for those of you who want my body to be buried. Whether you want buried or cremation, go to the market, get fresh flowers. People want me buried, put the fresh flowers along this side of me after I'm gone. People who want the other fate for me, put the fresh flowers on the opposite side. So Nanak gets sick, he passes away, and the people do just that. Many of them put fresh flowers on one side, and many of them put fresh flowers on the other side. And Nanak's instructions were, whoever's flowers remain fresh the longest, that's what you'll go with. So if Team Cremation's flowers remain fresh, then we'll go with cremation. If it's Team Burial, then you go with burial. So what happened? Well, they put a sheet over Nanak's body while they waited for the flowers to lose their freshness. And then a few days go by. Flowers are still fresh on both sides. More days go by. Flowers still fresh. Even more still fresh. And then finally, they come back. And the sheet covering Nanak's body had been pulled away. And the body was gone. And all the flowers surrounding him were equally fresh. Do you see the genius of Nanak? Even in his death, he was a peacemaker. Because if there's no body, then there's no problem. In other words, the problem is solved. You don't have to worry about cremating or burying something that doesn't exist. So that's the legend surrounding Nanak's death. I really like that story. So this is a union or a blend of Islam and Hinduism. So here are the elements, the important elements of each that I want you to know about. God is known as the true name. Nanak rejected the teaching of ahimsa. Why? Whoops, sorry, let's go back here. Here we go. My apologies. Nanak rejects the teaching of ahimsa because he thought that that there were many animals on this planet that were given to humanity as a gift, and human beings are at the pinnacle of creation, and so we are special, and these animals are here in part to nourish us in terms of nutrition. However, there was a widespread practice of pacifism. So So nonviolence was really of paramount importance. So we see samsara and karma. Those are elements of Hinduism. They also show up in Sikhism. So again, not ahimsa, but pacifism. So they really emphasize simplicity. In Hinduism, there are a lot of complex rituals, many different gods, but there's a distrust and a rejection of those rituals. So going back to samsara and karma, remember, negative karma fuels the cycle of samsara. You can accumulate negative karma by being an immoral person, by denying truth, and by not fulfilling your duty. And that will keep you in that cycle of being born, living, death, and being reborn over and over again, like a never-ending Groundhog Day. Many Sikhs distrust and reject rituals, and there's a story of Nanak, who is listening to the sermon of an imam. So I don't think we've talked about this yet, but an imam is a leader in an Islamic, in a Muslim community. So they would be the go-to person at a mosque, right, which is a place of worship, like a temple or a church, and the imam would be the person who is wise and selected by the community in many cases. So this imam's giving this sermon, and Nanak, all of a sudden in the middle of it, just bursts out laughing, seemingly super rude, interrupts this imam and the sermon, and the imam says, how dare you, what makes you, why are you laughing? And Nanak says, I'm laughing because you preach one thing, but I can tell that in your mind, your thoughts are of something petty, of something materialistic. You're worried about your horse. You're worried about your horse who you think is in trouble. So you're preaching one thing, but your mind is elsewhere. So Nanak, legend has it that he could see into the mind of this imam. So there are a bunch of gurus or special teachers in Sikhism, and I want you to know about just a handful of them. So Nanak is considered one, and I also want you to know about another one, the fifth guru, who's named Arjan Dev, and he's important because he compiles the sacred scriptures of Sikhism, and the name of those scriptures is the Adi Granth. So you have the fifth guru, Arjan Dev, who compiled the Sikh scriptures, the Adi Granth. And many of them are the words and hymns of Nanak. And it's quite long. It's 3 times the size of the Rig Veda, one of the 4 Vedas from Hinduism. So you should know about Guru Nanak, Guru Arjan Dev, and also the 10th guru, whose name was Gobind Singh. So Gobind Singh is the leader or founder of one of several Sikh sects. There are several of these, and one of them is the Singhs. And many Sikhs have the name Singh as a tribute, a namesake for this sect. And that roughly means the lions. So they followed Gobind. And because of the conflicts in the area, Sikhs would be trained for self-defense, to defend their families and their community and their religion. And so part of defense is often weapons, and the sword became an important component of this tradition, and he introduced it into the baptism. So for Sikhs, baptism is later in life, usually, and some water with sugar sprinkled in it will be stirred with a small sword, and then that will be used in the baptism. So you might know from history that the British took control of this region for a long time, and the many of the followers of Gobind Singh defended their families and communities and territory, but eventually lost to the British. However, because they fought so valiantly, the British decided to hire them as a peacekeeping source because they were so well trained and disciplined. Many Sikhs will wear coarse yellow garments, kind of like Buddhist monks. Some of them will go naked like Jains. So here's a painting of Gobind Singh. You can see that coarse garment. You can see the sword in his left hand, and what looks to be a very distinguished bird, a falcon or a hawk. I couldn't tell you for sure myself. I've got a couple of videos here that you should check out. One of them is about a Sikh man who wasn't allowed to participate in jury duty, which is a constitutional right of all Americans. So this is an American Sikh, and this superior court, this is in California, Sutter County, denied him the right to participate for jury duty because he refused to remove that small sword. It's just a few inches long, the blade. And he says, no, I'm not going to remove my sword. This is an expression of my religion. It's protected under the First Amendment. And it's not something I use. It's just part of my commitment to the faith. And this person wasn't allowed to participate. So you might, I don't even really know what ended up happening. It still might be an ongoing case. But you could see, concerns about safety on the one hand, but then also the constitutional First Amendment right to practice religion on the other. So that's an interesting video, an interesting debate you can have with each other, or just kind of to think about. Here's another great clip that I saw recently, the new Daily Show with Trevor Noah. Unfortunately, there's a lot of Islamophobia in our country, and believe it or not, many Sikhs are the target of it. Sikhism is an entirely different religion than Islam. Yes, it has roots in Islam, but also has roots in Hinduism, but it is very much a different religion from Islam, just like Buddhism is a distinct religion from Hinduism, even though it has roots in Hinduism. Many Sikhs will wear a turban, as you can see in this image and in the video, and for whatever reason, I guess it's a historical accident, people associate turbans with Muslims, although turbans should be more associated with Sikhs. Muslim men and women often will cover their heads, but you won't see the turban in that culture very much. So so watch that video about how they get targeted. They get called things like ISIS or terrorists. And probably the most interesting part of that video is that they refuse to throw their Muslim brothers and sisters under the bus. They could very easily declare or wear a shirt or start a campaign to say don't target us, target the Muslims. They're the ones with the problem. We're not Muslim. But they say that's not how they're raised, and that's not a part of their faith or their religion, and they refuse to do it. So the Singhs are one sect. Another one is named the Udaisis, and they're most similar to the Jains, who are very ascetic, right? So live the life, a monk-like life, very minimalistic, simple life. And the third sect I want you to know about, the Sahadaris. So we've got the Singhs, the Udesi, the Singhs, followers of Gobind, and they were kind of the peacekeepers. A lot of them historically were trained in defense. The Udesis, they're kind of like monk-like. And then the Sahadaris, they actually reject the militaristic characteristic of some of the Sikhism that we saw in the Singh tradition. And where some Sikhs will grow out their facial hair, many of the Sahadaris will be clean-shaven. So there's a de-emphasis of elaborate ceremonies. Sikh religious life and rituals are very simplistic. And they're, as I said before, they're skeptical of overly complicated and overly sophisticated ceremonies. It's a very simple life, so we see a similarity to Jainism there. And I mentioned before that the Sikh baptism with the small sword and the sugar water being stirred. You think of baptism, many of your experiences might be baptism is something that happens early on in life, when you are very young, an infant. But for many Sikhs, baptism will happen much later in life, at maturity. And the idea is that it's when you're baptized into the religion, even if your parents are Sikh, you'll be baptized often much later in life. And that's because it's a decision that you make for yourself. It's not something that is automatic. You get to decide with a mature mind that this tradition is for you. So some of these rituals, they're very simplistic. Prayers and hymns in the morning and evening. And instead of having kind of an official imam or priest or rabbi, the services are led by pretty much ordinary but esteemed members of the community. Sikhism is attractive to many Americans because of the equality factor. There's no caste system, so that part of Hinduism, that gets rejected, just like from Hinduism and Buddhism. And there's very much gender equality. So many Westerners, Americans, Europeans have been attracted to Sikhism. Now I said that they're very simplistic, just like the Jains, but there's at least one temple that maybe is going against that simplicity. And this, as you can see, is very much more ornate. This is the Golden Temple. It's located in northern India, near Pakistan. The central object in this temple is a copy of the sacred scripture. That's the Adi Granth, again compiled by Arjan Dev. Here is another image. It's very pretty there on the water. Here it is at daytime. And let's finish up by just talking about a symbol that is commonly associated with Sikhism. And the name of the entire symbol and the middle sword, it's often called the Khanda, right? So there's a spelling there. That's the double-edged sword in the middle, and that represents knowledge of God. And then you can see that there are a couple other swords there on the left and the right. So those are called Miri and Piri, and they represent political and spiritual sovereignty. Miri and Piri, political, so kind of freedom and right to govern yourself, sovereignness or sovereignty, freedom in terms of the state and in terms of the religion, the left and the right. And then that circle that is in the middle, that is the chakar, which represents the eternal nature of God. Circles often represent eternity and kind of the oneness of humanity. Yeah, so that's a very common symbol in Sikhism. Sikhs are quite proud. There are, when this was made, over 19 million, but probably more now. A lot of them live in that area, the Punjab, which is in Pakistan and northern India. But there are many Sikhs who live in the United States, many of them in the Bay Area, and a lot of them might be your peers. So that's all I got for you on Sikhism, and I bid you adieu until next time.